You're listening to Common Sense by Thomas Paine, in a modern, updated edition from Updated Works. First published in 1776, Common Sense made the case that America should no longer seek reconciliation with the British Crown, but independence as a free people. This edition keeps Paine's urgency and argument intact, while updating the older language for modern listeners. This full audiobook is available for free. If this work serves you, and you would like to support future editions, please purchase a physical copy at updatedworks.com. Now, Common Sense. Introduction. Perhaps the sentiments contained in the following pages are not yet sufficiently fashionable to gain them general favor. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right, and at first raises a formidable outcry in defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides. Time makes more converts than reason. A long and violent abuse of power generally calls its legitimacy into question, even in matters that might never have been questioned at all if the sufferers had not been provoked into inquiry. The King of England has undertaken, in his own right, to support the Parliament in what he calls theirs. The good people of this country are grievously oppressed by that combination. They therefore have an undoubted right to examine the pretensions of both, and equally to reject the usurpation of either. In the following pages, the author has carefully avoided everything that is personal among ourselves. Compliments as well as censure toward individuals form no part of this work. The wise and the worthy have no need of the triumph of a pamphlet, and those whose sentiments are injudicious or unfriendly will fall silent on their own, unless too much effort is spent trying to convert them. The cause of America is, in a great measure, the cause of all mankind. Many circumstances have arisen, and will arise, that are not local but universal, touching the principles of all who love humanity, and engaging their deepest sympathies in the outcome. Laying a country desolate with fire and sword, declaring war against the natural rights of all mankind, and driving the defenders of those rights from the face of the earth, is the concern of every person to whom nature has given the power of feeling. Of that class, regardless of party censure, is the author, postscript to the preface in the third edition. P.S. The publication of this new edition has been delayed in order to take notice, if necessary, of any attempt to refute the doctrine of independence. As no answer has yet appeared, it is now presumed that none will come, since the time needed to prepare such a response for the public has already passed. The public does not need to know who the author of this work is, since the object deserving attention is the doctrine itself, not the man. Still, it is worth saying that he is unconnected with any party, and under no sort of influence, public or private, but the influence of reason and principle. Philadelphia, February 14th, 1776. Chapter 1. The Origin and Design of Government in General. With concise remarks on the English Constitution, some writers have so confused society with government that they leave little or no distinction between them. Yet not only are they different, they have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections. The latter does so negatively by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse, the other creates distinctions. The first is a patron, the last a punisher. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is only a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. When we endure the same miseries under a government that we might expect in a country without any government at all, our calamity is made worse by the reflection that we ourselves furnish the means by which we endure them. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built upon the ruins of the bowers of paradise. If the impulses of conscience were clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. But that not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender a part of his property to furnish the means for protecting the rest. He is led to do this by the same prudence that in every other situation advises him to choose the lesser of two evils. Since security is the true design and end of government, it follows without question that whatever form of government seems most likely to ensure that security, with the least expense and the greatest benefit, is preferable to all others. To gain a clear and just idea of the design and end of government, let us suppose a small number of persons settled in some remote part of the earth, unconnected with the rest of the world. They will represent the first peopling of any country or of the world. In this state of natural liberty, society will be their first thought. 1,000 motives will drive them toward it. The strength of one man is so unequal to his wants, and his mind so unsuited to perpetual solitude, that he is soon obliged to seek the help of another, who in his turn requires the same. 4 or 5 united would be able to raise a tolerable dwelling in the midst of a wilderness, but one man might labor out the common period of life without accomplishing anything. When he had felled his timber, he could not remove it, nor erect it after it was removed. Hunger, in the meantime, would urge him to quit his work, and every different need would call him a different way. Disease, or even misfortune, would be death, for though neither might be mortal, either would disable him from living and reduce him to a state in which he might rather be said to perish than to die. Necessity, then, like a gravitating power, would soon pour these newly arrived emigrants into society. The mutual blessings of that society would make the obligations of law and government unnecessary so long as they remained perfectly just to each other. But since nothing short of heaven is impregnable to vice, it will unavoidably happen that as they overcome the first difficulties of settlement, which had bound them together in a common cause, they will begin to relax in their duty and attachment to one another. This loosening will make plain the necessity of establishing some form of government to supply the defect of moral restraint. Some convenient tree will afford them a state house, under whose branches the whole colony may assemble to deliberate on public matters. Their first laws will most likely bear the title only of regulations and be enforced by no other penalty than public disapproval. In this first parliament, every man will have a seat by natural right. But as the colony grows, its public concerns will grow likewise. The distances between members will make it too impractical for all of them to meet on every occasion as they did at first, when their numbers were small, their homes near, and their public concerns few and trifling. This will show them the convenience of leaving the legislative work to be managed by a select number chosen from the whole body, who are assumed to have the same concerns at stake as those who appointed them, and who will act as the whole body would act if present. If the colony continues to grow, it will become necessary to increase the number of representatives, and so that the interest of every part of the colony may be attended to, it will be best to divide the whole into convenient districts, each sending its proper number, so that the elected might never form for themselves an interest separate from the electors. Prudence will recommend frequent elections, since by that means the elected might return in a few months and mix again with the general body of electors. Their fidelity to the public will be secured by the prudent reflection that they are not making a raw for themselves. As this frequent interchange establishes a common interest throughout every part of the community, they will mutually and naturally support each other. On this, and not on the empty name of king, depends the strength of government and the happiness of the governed. Here, then, is the origin and rise of government, a mode made necessary by the inability of morality to govern the world. Here, too, is the design and end of government, namely freedom and security. However much our eyes may be dazzled by show, or our ears deceived by sound, however much prejudice may warp our wills, or self-interest darken our understanding, the simple voice of nature and reason will say it is right. I draw my idea of the form of government from a principle in nature that no artifice can overturn. The more simple a thing is, the less liable it is to disorder, and the easier it is to repair when disordered. With this maxim in view, I offer a few remarks on the much-praised Constitution of England. That it was admirable for the dark and slavish times in which it was erected may be granted. When the world was overrun with tyranny, even the smallest departure from it was a glorious rescue. But that it is imperfect, prone to convulsions, and incapable of producing what it seems to promise is easily demonstrated. Absolute governments, though the disgrace of human nature, have this advantage. They are simple. If the people endure hardship, they know the source of their suffering, and likewise know the remedy, and are not bewildered by a variety of causes and cures. The Constitution of England, by contrast, is so exceedingly complex that the nation may endure hardship for years together without being able to tell where the fault lies. Some will say in one part, some in another, and every political physician will prescribe a different medicine. I know it is difficult to overcome local or long-standing prejudices, yet if we will allow ourselves to examine the component parts of the English Constitution, we shall find them to be the degraded remains of two ancient tyrannies, compounded with some new republican materials. First, the remains of monarchical tyranny in the person of the king. Secondly, the remains of aristocratic tyranny in the persons of the peers. Thirdly, the new republican materials in the persons of the commons, on whose virtue the freedom of England depends. The two first, being hereditary, are independent of the people, and so, in any constitutional sense, contribute nothing toward the freedom of the state. To say that the Constitution of England is a union of three powers mutually checking each other is absurd. Either the words have no meaning, or they are flat contradictions. To say that the Commons is a check upon the king presupposes two things. First, that the king is not to be trusted without oversight. In other words, that a thirst for absolute power is the natural disease of monarchy. Secondly, that the Commons, being appointed for that purpose, are either wiser or more worthy of confidence than the Crown. Yet the same Constitution that gives the Commons the power to check the king by withholding supplies also gives the king the power to check the Commons by empowering him to reject their other bills. This in turn supposes the king to be wiser than those whom the Constitution has already supposed to be wiser than him. A mere absurdity. There is something exceedingly ridiculous in the composition of monarchy. It first excludes a man from the means of information, yet empowers him to act in cases where the highest judgment is required. The position of a king shuts him off from the world, yet the work of a king requires him to know it thoroughly. The different parts of the arrangement thus unnaturally oppose and destroy each other, and show the whole arrangement to be absurd and useless. Some writers have explained the English Constitution this way. The king is one power, the people another. The peers form a house on behalf of the king, the commons on behalf of the people. But this arrangement has all the marks of a house divided against itself. The expressions may be pleasantly arranged, yet when examined, they turn out idle and ambiguous. When the most careful construction words can manage is applied to something that either cannot exist or is too incomprehensible to describe, those words become mere sound. They may please the ear, but they cannot inform the mind. This explanation raises a prior question. How did the king come by a power the people are afraid to trust and always obliged to check? Such a power could not be the gift of a wise people, and no power that requires checking can be from God. Yet the Constitution's very provision for checking it supposes such a power exists. But that provision is unequal to the task. The means either cannot or will not accomplish the end, and the whole affair defeats itself. The greater weight will always carry up the lesser, and as all the wheels of a machine are set in motion by one, it only remains to know which power in the Constitution has the most weight, for that power will govern. The others may clog, or as the phrase goes, check the speed of its motion, yet as long as they cannot stop it, their efforts will be ineffective. The first moving power will at last have its way, and what it lacks in speed, it gains in time. That the crown is this overbearing part of the English Constitution hardly needs to be said, and that it derives its entire consequence merely from being the giver of places and pensions is self-evident. So though we have been wise enough to shut and lock a door against absolute monarchy, we have at the same time been foolish enough to put the crown in possession of the key. The prejudice of Englishmen in favor of their own government by king, lords, and commons arises as much from national pride as from reason, if not more. Individuals are no doubt safer in England than in some other countries, but the will of the king is as much the law of the land in Britain as in France, with this difference. Instead of proceeding directly from his mouth, it is handed to the people under the formidable shape of an Act of Parliament. For the fate of Charles I has only made kings more subtle, not more just. So setting aside all national pride and bias in favor of forms and modes, the plain truth is that it is entirely owing to the constitution of the people, and not to the constitution of the government, that the crown is not as oppressive in England as in Turkey. An inquiry into the constitutional errors of the English form of government is at this time highly necessary. We are never in a proper condition to do justice to others while we remain under the influence of some leading partiality, and we are equally incapable of doing justice to ourselves while we remain bound by obstinate prejudice. A man attached to a prostitute is unfit to choose or judge of a wife, and any prepossession in favor of a rotten constitution of government will disable us from recognizing a good one. Of monarchy and hereditary succession. Mankind being originally equals in the order of creation, that equality could only be destroyed by some subsequent circumstance. The distinctions of rich and poor can in great measure be accounted for without resorting to the harsh names of oppression and avarice. Oppression is often the consequence of riches, but seldom or never the means of acquiring them. Avarice will preserve a man from being desperately poor, but it generally makes him too timid to become truly wealthy. But there is another and greater distinction for which no truly natural or religious reason can be given, and that is the distinction of men into kings and subjects. Male and female are distinctions of nature. Good and bad are distinctions of heaven. But how a race of men came into the world so exalted above the rest, and distinguished like some new species, is worth inquiring into, as is the question of whether they are the means of happiness or of misery to mankind. In the early ages of the world, according to scripture chronology, there were no kings, and the consequence was that there were no wars. It is the pride of kings that throws mankind into confusion. Holland, without a king, enjoyed more peace over the last century than any of the monarchical governments in Europe. Antiquity supports the same observation, for the quiet and pastoral lives of the first patriarchs have a certain liveliness about them that vanishes entirely when we come to the history of Jewish royalty. Government by kings was first introduced into the world by the heathens, from whom the children of Israel copied the custom. It was the most successful invention the devil ever set in motion for the promotion of idolatry. The heathens paid divine honors to their deceased kings, and the Christian world improved on the plan by doing the same to their living ones. How impious is the title of sacred majesty applied to a worm who, in the midst of his splendor, is crumbling into dust. Exalting one man so greatly above the rest cannot be justified on the equal rights of nature, and it cannot be defended on the authority of Scripture either. The will of the Almighty, as declared by Gideon and the prophet Samuel, expressly disapproves of government by kings. All the anti-monarchical parts of Scripture have been very smoothly glossed over in monarchical governments, but they undoubtedly deserve the attention of countries that still have their governments to form. Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's is the Scripture doctrine of courts, yet it offers no support for monarchical government, for the Jews at that time were without a king and in a state of vassalage to the Romans. Nearly 3,000 years passed from the Mosaic account of the creation before the Jews, under a national delusion, requested a king. Until then, their form of government, except in extraordinary cases where the Almighty intervened, was a kind of republic, administered by a judge and the elders of the tribes. They had no kings, and it was held sinful to acknowledge any being under that title but the Lord of hosts. When a man seriously reflects on the idolatrous homage paid to the persons of kings, he need not wonder that the Almighty, ever jealous of his honor, should disapprove a form of government that so impiously invades the prerogative of heaven. Monarchy is ranked in Scripture as one of the sins of the Jews, for which a curse in reserve is pronounced against them. The history of that transaction is worth attending to. The children of Israel were oppressed by the Midianites. Gideon marched against them with a small army, and victory through divine interposition decided in his favor. The Jews, elated with the outcome and attributing it to Gideon's generalship, proposed making him a king, saying, "Rule thou over us, thou and thy son, and thy son's son." Here was temptation in its fullest extent, not a kingdom only, but a hereditary one. But Gideon, in the piety of his soul, replied, "I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Words could not be more explicit. Gideon does not decline the honor on grounds of unworthiness, but denies their right to give it. He does not compliment them with invented declarations of thanks, but in the positive style of a prophet, charges them with disaffection toward their proper sovereign, the King of heaven. About 130 years after this, they fell again into the sea, into the same error. The Jews had a strange and unaccountable hunger for the idolatrous customs of the heathens. Seizing on the misconduct of Samuel's 2 sons, who had been entrusted with some secular concerns, they came to Samuel in an abrupt and clamorous manner, saying, "Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the other nations." Their motives were plainly bad. They wanted to be like the heathens, whereas their true honor lay in being as unlike them as possible. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, "Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me, and served other gods. So do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. That is, not of any particular king, but the general manner of the kings of the earth, whom Israel was so eagerly copying after. And notwithstanding the great distance of time and difference of manners, the character is still in fashion. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. And he said, "This shall be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons, and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots." This description agrees with the present mode of pressing men into service. And he will appoint him captains over thousands, and captains over 50s, will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. This describes the expense and luxury, as well as the oppression of kings. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the 10th of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give them to his officers, and to his servants. By which we see that bribery, corruption, and favoritism are the standing vices of kings. And he will take the 10th of your men servants, and your maid servants, and your goodliest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. And he will take the 10th of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants, and ye shall cry out in that day, because of your king which ye shall have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. This accounts for the continuation of monarchy. The few good kings who have lived since neither sanctify the title nor erase the sinfulness of its origin. The high praise given to David takes no notice of him in his official role as king, but only as a man after God's own heart. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles." Samuel continued to reason with them, but to no purpose. He set before them their ingratitude, yet nothing availed. Seeing them fully bent on their folly, he cried out, "I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain," which was then a punishment, being in the time of wheat harvest. "That ye may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king." So Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day. And all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, "Pray for thy servants unto the Lord thy God, that we die not, for we have added unto our sins this evil, to ask a king." These portions of Scripture are direct and positive. They admit of no ambiguous construction. Either the Almighty has here entered his protest against monarchical government, or the Scripture is false. A man has good reason to believe that there is as much of kingcraft as priestcraft in withholding the Scripture from the public in popish countries. For monarchy in every instance is the popery of government. To the evil of monarchy we have added that of hereditary succession. The first is a degradation and lessening of ourselves. The second, claimed as a matter of right, is an insult, an imposition on posterity. Since all men are originally equals, no one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever. Though a man himself might deserve some decent degree of honors from his contemporaries, his descendants might be far too unworthy to inherit them. One of the strongest natural proofs of the folly of hereditary right in kings is that nature itself disapproves it, otherwise she would not so frequently turn it into ridicule, by giving mankind an ass for a lion. Secondly, since no man at first could possess any public honors beyond those bestowed upon him, the givers of those honors had no power to give away the rights of posterity. They might say, "We choose you for our head," but they could not, without manifest injustice to their children, say that your children and your children's children shall reign over ours forever. Such an unwise, unjust, and unnatural compact might, in the very next succession, place them under the government of a rogue or a fool. Most wise men in their private sentiments have always treated hereditary right with contempt. Yet it is one of those evils which, once established, is not easily removed. Many submit from fear, others from superstition, and the more powerful part simply shares with the king in plundering the rest. This is assuming that the present race of kings had an honorable origin. In truth, it is more than probable that, if we could strip away the dark covering of antiquity and trace them to their first rise, we should find the first of them nothing better than the chief ruffian of some restless gang, a man whose savage cunning and dominance earned him the title of leader among plunderers. By increasing in power and extending his depredations, he overawed the quiet and defenseless into purchasing their safety through frequent tribute. Yet his followers could have had no idea of giving hereditary right to his descendants, because such a perpetual exclusion of themselves was incompatible with the free principles they claimed to live by. Hereditary succession in the early ages of monarchy therefore could not have taken hold as a matter of right, but only as something contingent or incidental. Since few or no records existed in those days, and traditional history was stuffed with fables, it was very easy, after a few generations had passed, to fabricate some convenient Muhammad-like superstitious tale and cram hereditary right down the throats of the credulous. Perhaps the disorder that threatened, or seemed to threaten, at the death of a leader and the choosing of a new one, for elections among ruffians could not be very orderly, induced many at first to favor hereditary claims. By this means it happened, as it has happened since, that what was at first submitted to as a convenience was afterwards claimed as a right. England, since the conquest, has known a few good monarchs, but has groaned under a far larger number of bad ones. Yet no man in his senses can call their claim under William the Conqueror a very honorable one. A French bastard landing with an armed band of thugs and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives is, in plain terms, a very shabby and contemptible origin. It certainly has no divinity in it. It is needless, however, to spend much time exposing the folly of hereditary right. If there are any so weak as to believe in it, let them worship the ass and the lion indiscriminately, and welcome. I shall neither copy their humility nor disturb their devotion. I would like to ask how anyone supposes kings came about in the first place. The question admits only three answers: either by lot, by election, or by usurpation. If the first king was chosen by lot, that establishes a precedent for the next, which excludes hereditary succession. Saul was chosen by lot, yet the succession was not hereditary, and nothing in that transaction suggests it was ever intended to be. If the first king of any country was chosen by election, that likewise establishes a precedent for the next. To say that the right of all future generations is taken away by the act of the first electors, who chose not only a king, but a family of kings forever, has no parallel in or out of Scripture except the doctrine of original sin, which supposes the free will of all men was lost in Adam. From that comparison, and no other fits, hereditary succession can derive no glory. For as in Adam all sinned, and as in the first electors all men obeyed, as in the one all mankind were subjected to Satan, and in the other to sovereignty, as our innocence was lost in the first, and our authority in the last, and as both disable us from reclaiming some former state and privilege, it follows without answer that original sin and hereditary succession are parallels. A dishonorable rank and an inglorious connection, yet the most subtle sophist cannot produce a more fitting comparison. As for usurpation, no one will be so bold as to defend it, and that William the Conqueror was a usurper is a fact that cannot be contradicted. The plain truth is that the antiquity of English monarchy will not bear looking into. But it is not so much the absurdity as the evil of hereditary succession that concerns mankind. If it ensured a race of good and wise men, it would carry the seal of divine authority. But because it opens a door to the foolish, the wicked, and the improper, it has in it the nature of oppression. Men who consider themselves born to reign and others born to obey soon grow insolent. Set apart from the rest of mankind, their minds are poisoned early by their own importance. The world they move in differs so greatly from the world at large that they have little opportunity of knowing its true interests, and when they come to govern, they are frequently the most ignorant and unfit of anyone throughout the dominions. Another evil that attends hereditary succession is that the throne is liable to be held by a minor of any age. During all that time, the regency, acting under cover of a king, has every opportunity and inducement to betray their trust. The same national misfortune occurs when a king worn out with age and infirmity enters the last stage of human weakness. In both these cases, the public becomes prey to every villain who can exploit successfully the follies either of age or infancy. The most plausible argument ever offered in favor of hereditary succession is that it preserves a nation from civil wars. If this were true, it would carry real weight, but it is the most shameless falsehood ever imposed upon mankind. The whole history of England disproves it. 30 kings and 2 minors have reigned in that troubled kingdom since the conquest, during which time there have been, including the Revolution, no fewer than 8 civil wars and 19 rebellions. So far from making for peace, hereditary succession works against it and destroys the very foundation it claims to rest upon. The contest for monarchy and succession between the houses of York and Lancaster drenched England in blood for many years. 12 pitched battles, besides skirmishes and sieges, were fought between Henry and Edward. Henry was twice taken prisoner by Edward, who, in his turn, was prisoner to Henry. So uncertain is the fate of war and the temper of a nation when nothing but personal rivalries are the ground of a quarrel, that Henry was carried in triumph from a prison to a palace, and Edward was forced to flee from a palace to a foreign land. Yet, since sudden shifts of temper seldom last, Henry, in his turn, was driven from the throne, and Edward recalled to succeed him, Parliament always following the stronger side. This contest began in the reign of Henry VI and was not entirely extinguished until Henry VII, in whom the two families were united. It covered a period of 6 years, from 1422 to 1489. In short, monarchy and succession have laid not this or that kingdom only, but the world in blood and ashes. It is a form of government against which the word of God bears testimony, and blood will attend it. If we look into what a king actually does, we find that in some countries he may do nothing at all. After wandering through his life without pleasure to himself or benefit to the nation, he withdraws from the scene and leaves his successor to tread the same idle round. In absolute monarchies, the whole weight of civil and military affairs rests on the king. The children of Israel, in their request for a king, made exactly this plea: that he may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. But in countries where he is neither judge nor general, as in England, a man would be hard-pressed to say what his business is. The closer any government comes to a republic, the less business there is for a king. It is somewhat difficult to find a proper name for the government of England. Sir William Meredith calls it a republic, but in its present state it is unworthy of the name. The corrupt influence of the Crown, by having all appointments in its disposal, has so thoroughly swallowed up the power and eaten out the virtue of the House of Commons, the republican part of the Constitution, that the government of England is nearly as monarchical as that of France or Spain. People quarrel with names without understanding them. It is the republican and not the monarchical part of the Constitution of England in which Englishmen glory, namely the liberty of choosing a House of Commons from out of their own body. And it is easy to see that when republican virtues fail, slavery follows. Why is the Constitution of England sickly? Because monarchy has poisoned the republic. The Crown has swallowed the Commons. In England, a king has little more to do than make war and hand out appointments, which in plain terms means impoverishing the nation and setting it at odds with itself. A fine business indeed for a man to be allowed £800,000 the sterling a year for, and worshipped into the bargain. One honest man is worth more to society, and in the sight of God, than all the crowned ruffians who ever lived. Chapter 2. Thoughts on the present state of American affairs. In the following pages, I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense. I ask only one thing of the reader, that he set aside prejudice and preconception, and let his reason and his feelings decide for themselves, that he put on, or rather that he not put off, the true character of a man, and generously extend his thinking beyond the present day. Volumes have been written on the struggle between England and America. Men of all ranks have entered the controversy, from different motives and with various designs, but all have been ineffectual, and the period of debate is closed. Arms, as the last resource, decide the contest. The appeal was the king's choice, and the continent has accepted the challenge. It was reported of the late Mr. Pelham, who, though an able minister, was not without his faults, that when attacked in the House of Commons for pursuing only temporary measures, he replied, "They will last my time." Should a thought so fatal and unmanly possess the colonies in the present contest, the name of ancestors will be remembered by future generations with detestation. The sun never shone on a cause of greater worth. This is not the affair of a city, a county, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, of at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe. It is not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity is virtually involved in the contest, and will be affected, more or less, even to the end of time, by what is done now. Now is the seed time of continental union, faith, and honor. The least fracture now will be like a name engraved with the point of a pin on the tender rind of a young oak. The wound would enlarge with the tree, and posterity would read it in full-grown characters. By shifting the matter from argument to arms, a new era for politics has been struck, and a new way of thinking has arisen. All plans and proposals made before the 19th of April, that is, before the commencement of hostilities, are like last year's almanacs. Proper enough then, but superseded and useless now. Whatever was advanced by advocates on either side of the question at that time ended in one and the same point, namely, a union with Great Britain. The only difference between the parties was the method of achieving it, one proposing force, the other friendship. As it has turned out, the first has failed, and the second has withdrawn its influence, and much has been said about the advantages of reconciliation, which, like an agreeable dream, has passed away and left us as we were. It is therefore right that we examine the other side of the argument, and inquire into some of the many material injuries these colonies sustain, and always will sustain, by being connected with and dependent on Great Britain. We must examine that connection and dependence on the principles of nature and common sense, to see what we have to rely on if separated, and what we are to expect if dependent. I have heard it asserted by some that because America has flourished under her former connection with Great Britain, the same connection is necessary for her future happiness, and will always produce the same effect. Nothing could be more fallacious than this kind of argument. We might as well assert that because a child has thrived on milk, it should never eat solid food, or that the first 20 years of our lives should become a rule for the next 20. But even this concedes more than is true. For I answer plainly that America would have flourished just as much, and probably much more, had no European power taken any notice of her at all. The commerce by which she has enriched herself consists in the necessaries of life, and will always find a market, while eating is the custom of Europe. But she has protected us, say some. That she has controlled us is true, and that she defended the continent at our expense as well as her own is admitted. She would have defended Turkey from the same motive, namely, for the sake of trade and dominion. Alas, we have been led astray for too long by ancient prejudices and have made large sacrifices to superstition. We have boasted of the protection of Great Britain without considering that her motive was interest, not attachment, and that she did not protect us from our enemies on our account, but from her enemies on her own account. Those enemies had no quarrel with us on any other ground, and they will always be our enemies on that same ground. Let Britain give up her claims to the continent, or let the continent throw off its dependence, and we would be at peace with France and Spain, even while they were at war with Britain. The miseries of Hanover in the last war ought to warn us against such entangling connections. It has lately been asserted in Parliament that the colonies have no relation to each other except through the parent country, meaning that Pennsylvania and the Jerseys, and so on for the rest, are sister colonies by way of England. This is certainly a very roundabout way of proving relationship, but it is the most direct and only true way of proving enmity, or enemyship, if I may call it that. France and Spain never were, nor perhaps ever will be, our enemies as Americans, but only as subjects of Great Britain. But Britain is the parent country, say some. Then the more shame upon her conduct. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor do savages make war on their own families. So if the assertion were true, it would only turn to her reproach. But it is not true, or only partly so. The phrase parent or mother country has been cunningly adopted by the king and his parasites, with a low design of gaining an unfair hold on the credulous weakness of our minds. Europe, not England, is the parent country of America. This new world has been the asylum for persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. Here they fled, not from the tender embraces of a mother, but from the cruelty of a monster. And it is true enough of England that the same tyranny which drove the first emigrants from home still pursues their descendants. In this vast quarter of the globe, we forget the narrow limits of 360 miles, the entire extent of England, and extend our friendship on a larger scale. We claim brotherhood with every European Christian and take pride in the generosity of that sentiment. It is striking to observe how gradually we overcome the force of local prejudice as we widen our acquaintance with the world. A man born in any English town divided into parishes will naturally associate most with his fellow parishioners, whose interests in many cases are common to his own, and will call such a man his neighbor. If he meets that same man a few miles from home, he drops the narrow idea of a street and greets him as a townsman. If he travels out of the county and meets him in another, he forgets the smaller divisions of street and town and calls him countryman. But if in their travels abroad they should meet in France or any other part of Europe, that local memory would expand into simply Englishman. And by an equal step of reasoning, all Europeans meeting in America or in any other quarter of the globe are countrymen. England, Holland, Germany, and Sweden, measured against the whole, stand in the same position on the larger scale that street, town, and county occupy on the smaller one. These are distinctions too limited for continental minds. Not 1/3 of the inhabitants, even of this province, Pennsylvania, are of English descent. I, therefore, reject the phrase of parent or mother country as applied to England alone, as false, selfish, narrow, and ungenerous. But suppose we were all of English descent. What would that amount to? Nothing. Britain, being now an open enemy, extinguishes every other name and title, and to speak of reconciliation as our duty is truly farcical. The first king of England, of the present line, William the Conqueror, was a Frenchman, and half the peers of England are descended from the same country. By the same method of reasoning, then, England ought to be governed by France. Much has been said of the united strength of Britain and the colonies, and how together they might defy the world. But this is mere presumption, and the claim means nothing in practice, for this continent would never allow itself to be drained of inhabitants to support the British arms in Asia, Africa, or Europe. Besides, what do we gain by setting the world at defiance? Our plan is commerce, and commerce well pursued will secure us the peace and friendship of all Europe, because it is in every European nation's interest to have America as a free port. Our trade will always be a protection, and our lack of gold and silver will secure us from invaders. I challenge the warmest advocate for reconciliation to show a single advantage this continent can gain from its connection with Great Britain. I repeat the challenge. Not a single advantage can be found. Our grain will fetch its price in any market in Europe, and our imported goods must be paid for wherever we buy them. But the injuries and disadvantages we face through that connection are without number, and our duty to mankind at large, as well as to ourselves, instructs us to renounce the alliance. Any submission to or dependence on Great Britain tends directly to involve this continent in European wars and quarrels, and to set us against nations that would otherwise seek our friendship, and against whom we have neither anger nor complaint. Since Europe is our market for trade, we ought to form no partial connection with any part of it. It is the true interest of America to steer clear of European contentions, which she can never do while her dependence on Britain makes her a counterweight in British politics. Europe is too densely packed with kingdoms to remain long at peace, and whenever a war breaks out between England and any foreign power, the trade of America is ruined because of her connection with Britain. The next war may not turn out as the last did, and if it does not, the advocates for reconciliation now will be wishing for separation then, because neutrality in that case would be a safer passage than a warship. Everything that is right or reasonable pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, "'Tis time to part." Even the distance at which the Almighty has placed England and America is strong and natural proof that the authority of one over the other was never the design of heaven. The time at which the continent was discovered adds weight to the argument, and the manner in which it was peopled increases the force of it. The Reformation was preceded by the discovery of America, as if the Almighty graciously meant to open a sanctuary to the persecuted in future years, when home would afford neither friendship nor safety. The authority of Great Britain over this continent is a form of government that sooner or later must come to an end. A serious mind can draw no true pleasure from looking forward under the painful and certain conviction that what he calls the present Constitution is merely temporary. As parents, we can have no joy knowing that this government is not lasting enough to secure anything we may leave to our children. And by plain reasoning, since we are running the next generation into debt, we ought to do the work of it ourselves. Otherwise, we treat them meanly and without respect. To discern the right line of our duty, we should take our children in hand and place ourselves a few years further into life. That vantage point will present a prospect that a few present fears and prejudices now conceal from our sight. Though I would carefully avoid giving unnecessary offense, I am inclined to believe that all those who espouse the doctrine of reconciliation may be placed within the following descriptions: interested men who are not to be trusted, weak men who cannot see, prejudiced men who will not see, and a certain class of moderate men who think better of the European world than it deserves. This last group, through ill-judged deliberation, will cause more calamities to this continent than all the other three combined. Many have the good fortune to live distant from the scene of present sorrow, and the evil has not been brought close enough to their doors for them to feel how precarious all American property truly is. But let our imaginations carry us for a moment to Boston. That seat of wretchedness will teach us wisdom and instruct us forever to renounce a power in whom we can place no trust. The inhabitants of that unfortunate city, who only a few months ago lived in ease and comfort, now face no alternative but to stay and starve or go out and beg. If they remain within the city, they are endangered by the fire of their friends. If they leave it, they are plundered by the soldiers. In their present situation, they are prisoners without hope of release, and in any general attack mounted for their relief, they would be exposed to the fury of both armies. Men of passive temper look somewhat lightly over the offenses of Great Britain, and still hoping for the best, are inclined to say, "Come, come, we shall be friends again for all this." But examine the passions and feelings of mankind. Bring the doctrine of reconciliation to the touchstone of nature, and then tell me whether you can hereafter love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that has carried kay and sword into your land. If you cannot do all these things, then you are only deceiving yourselves, and by your delay, bringing ruin upon those who come after you. Your future connection with Britain, whom you can neither love nor honor, will be forced and unnatural. Being formed only on the plan of present convenience, it will before long collapse into a relapse more wretched than the first. But if you say you can still pass over these violations, then I ask, has your house been burned? Has your property been destroyed before your face? Are your wife and children without a bed to lie on, or bread to live on? Have you lost a parent or a child at their hands? And are you yourself the ruined and wretched survivor? If not, then you are no judge of those who have suffered these things. But if you have and can still shake hands with the murderers, then you are unworthy of the name of husband, father, friend, or lover, and whatever your rank or title in life, you have the heart of a coward and the spirit of a sycophant. This is not inflaming or exaggerating matters, but testing them by those feelings and affections which nature justifies, and without which we would be incapable of discharging the social duties of life or enjoying its blessings. I do not mean to exhibit horror for the purpose of provoking revenge, but to awaken us from fatal and unmanly sleep, so that we may pursue some fixed object with determination. It is not in the power of Britain or of Europe to conquer America. If she does not conquer herself by delay and timidity. The present winter is worth an age if rightly used, but if lost or neglected, the whole continent will share in the misfortune. There is no punishment too severe for the man, whoever and wherever he may be, who becomes the means of sacrificing so precious and useful a season. It is contrary to reason, to the universal order of things, and to every example from former ages, to suppose that this continent can long remain subject to any external power. Even the most optimistic voices in Britain do not think so. The utmost reach of human wisdom cannot at this time produce a plan, short of separation, that can promise the continent even a year's security. Reconciliation is now a false dream. Nature has deserted the connection, and no human skill can supply her place. As Milton wisely expresses it, never can true reconcilement grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep. Every peaceful method has been ineffectual. Our prayers have been rejected with disdain, and that rejection has shown us that nothing flatters vanity or confirms obstinacy in kings more than repeated petitioning. Nothing has contributed more to making the kings of Europe absolute than that very measure. Witness Denmark and Sweden. Since nothing but force will do, for God's sake let us come to a final separation and not leave the next generation to be cutting throats under the hollow and meaningless names of parent and child. To say that Britain will never attempt to subdue us again is idle and fanciful. We thought the same at the repeal of the Stamp Act, yet a year or two proved us wrong. We might just as well suppose that nations once defeated will never renew the quarrel. As to matters of government, it is not in Britain's power to do this continent justice. The work of governing it will soon be too weighty and complex to be managed with any reasonable degree of competence by a power so distant from us and so entirely ignorant of us. For if they cannot conquer us, they cannot govern us. To be forever running 3,000 or 4,000 miles with a message or petition, waiting 4 or 5 months for an answer, which when obtained requires 5 or 6 more to explain, will within a few years be seen for the folly and childishness it is. There was a time when such an arrangement was proper, and there is a proper time for it to end. Small islands not capable of protecting themselves are proper objects for a government to take under its care, but there is something absurd in supposing that a continent should be perpetually governed by an island. Nature has never made a satellite larger than its primary planet, and since England and America, in relation to each other, reverse that natural order, it is evident they belong to different systems. England to Europe, America to itself. I am not moved by pride, party, or resentment to embrace the doctrine of separation and independence. I am clearly, positively, and conscientiously persuaded that independence is the true interest of this continent, that everything short of that is mere patchwork, that it can produce no lasting happiness, that any lesser outcome leaves the sword to our children and represents a retreat at the very moment when a little more, a little further, would have made this continent the glory of the earth. Since Britain has not shown the least inclination toward a compromise, we may be certain that no terms can be obtained worthy of this continent's acceptance, or in any way equal to the expense of blood and treasure we have already suffered. The object fought for should always bear some just proportion to the cost. The removal of North, or of the whole detestable ministry, is a matter unworthy the millions we have spent. A temporary stoppage of trade would have been a sufficient inconvenience to balance the repeal of all the acts complained of, had those repeals been obtained. But if the whole continent must take up arms, if every man must be a soldier, it is scarcely worth our while to fight against a contemptible ministry alone. We pay dearly indeed for the repeal of the acts, if that is all we fight for. In careful reckoning, it is as great a folly to pay a Bunker Hill price for law as for land. I have always regarded the independence of this continent as an event that must arrive sooner or later, and given the rapid progress toward maturity the continent has lately made, that event cannot be far off. On the outbreak of hostilities, therefore, it was not worth disputing a matter that time would have finally resolved, unless we meant to be in earnest about it. Otherwise, it is like spending an estate on a lawsuit to correct the trespasses of a tenant whose lease is nearly expired. No man wished more warmly for reconciliation than I did before the fatal 19th of April, 1775. But the moment the events of that day were made known, I rejected the hardened, sullen-tempered Pharaoh of England forever, and I scorn the wretch who, with the pretended title of father of his people, can hear of their slaughter without feeling, and sleep composedly with their blood upon his soul. But suppose matters were now settled, what would follow? I answer, the ruin of the continent, and that for several reasons. First, the powers of governing would still remain in the hands of the king, who holds a veto over all legislation on this continent. He has already shown himself an inveterate enemy to liberty, and displayed a clear thirst for arbitrary power. Is he, or is he not, a proper person to say to these colonies, "You shall make no laws but what I please"? Is there any inhabitant of America so ignorant as not to know that, according to what is called the present Constitution, this continent can make no laws without the king's approval? And is there any man so unwise as not to see that, given what has already happened, he will allow no law to be made here except what suits his purpose? We may be as effectively enslaved by the absence of laws in America as by submitting to laws made for us in England. After matters are settled, can there be any doubt that the whole power of the crown will be exerted to keep this continent as low and humble as possible? Instead of moving forward, we will go backward, or be perpetually quarreling, or ridiculously petitioning. We are already greater than the king wishes us to be, and will he not work to make us less? To bring the matter to a single point, is the power that is jealous of our prosperity a proper power to govern us? Whoever says no to that question is already for independence, because independence means nothing more than this: whether we shall make our own laws, or whether the king, the greatest enemy this continent has or can have, shall tell us there shall be no laws but such as I like. But the king, you will say, has a veto in England too. The people there can make no laws without his consent. In terms of right and good order, it is something truly ridiculous that a youth of 21 should say to several millions of people, older and wiser than himself, "I forbid this or that act of yours to be law." I will not press that line of reply here, though I will never cease to expose its absurdity. I answer only this: England is the king's home, and America is not, and that makes an entirely different case. The king's veto here is 10 times more dangerous than it can be in England, for there he will scarcely refuse his consent to a bill putting England in a strong state of defense, while in America he would never allow such a bill to pass. America is only a secondary concern in the system of British politics. England consults the good of this country only so far as it serves her own purpose. Her own interest, therefore, leads her to suppress the growth of ours in every case that does not advance her advantage or that in the least interferes with it. We would soon be in a poor condition under such a second-hand government, considering what has already happened. Men do not change from enemies to friends by a change of name. To show that reconciliation is now a dangerous doctrine, I affirm that it would be shrewd policy for the king to repeal the acts, for the sake of reinstating himself in the government of the provinces, so that he may accomplish by craft and subtlety in the long run what he cannot do by force and violence in the short one. Reconciliation and ruin are near relations. Secondly, even the best terms we can hope to obtain would amount to no more than a temporary arrangement, a kind of government by guardianship lasting only until the colonies come of age. The general state of things in the meantime would be unsettled and unpromising. Emigrants of property will not choose to come to a country whose form of government hangs by a thread and totters daily on the brink of commotion. And many of the present inhabitants would use the interval to sell off their property and leave the continent. The most powerful argument of all, however, is this: nothing but independence, that is, a continental form of government, can keep the peace of the continent and preserve it from civil wars. I dread the consequences of a reconciliation with Britain now, because it is more than probable that such a reconciliation would be followed by a revolt somewhere, the consequences of which could be far more fatal than all the malice of Britain. Thousands are already ruined by British barbarity, and thousands more will probably suffer the same fate. Those men feel things differently from those of us who have suffered nothing. All they now possess is liberty. What they previously enjoyed has been sacrificed in its service, and having nothing more to lose, they refuse to submit. Beyond that, the general temper of the colonies toward a British government will be like that of a young man nearly out of his apprenticeship. They will care very little about her. A government that cannot preserve the peace is no government at all, and in that case we pay our money for nothing. Consider what Britain could actually do, her power being wholly on paper, if a civil tumult broke out the very day after reconciliation. I have heard men say, many of whom I believe spoke without thinking, that they dreaded independence because they feared it would produce civil wars. It is seldom that our first thoughts are truly correct, and this is such a case, for there is 10 times more to dread from a patched-up connection than from independence. I make the sufferer's case my own, and I declare that were I driven from house and home, my property destroyed, and my circumstances ruined, I could never, as a man keenly aware of injuries, embrace the doctrine of reconciliation or consider myself bound by it. The colonies have shown such a spirit of good order and obedience to continental government as should put every reasonable person at ease. No one can find the least grounds for fear, except on grounds that are truly childish and ridiculous, namely, that one colony will strive for superiority over another. Where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality offers no temptation. The republics of Europe are all, and may be said always to be, at peace. Holland and Switzerland are without wars, foreign or domestic. Monarchical governments, it is true, are never long at rest. The crown itself is a temptation to ambitious troublemakers at home, and the pride and insolence that always attend royal authority swells into conflict with foreign powers in cases where a republican government, being founded on more natural principles, would simply negotiate the misunderstanding away. If there is any real cause for fear regarding independence, it is that no plan has yet been laid down. People do not see their way forward. So, as an opening into that subject, I offer the following suggestions, while frankly acknowledging that I hold no higher opinion of them than that they may give rise to something better. If the scattered thoughts of individuals could be gathered together, they would often furnish materials for wise and able minds to work into something useful. Let the assemblies be annual, with a president only. Let the representation be more equal, their business wholly domestic and subject to the authority of a continental Congress. Let each colony be divided into 6, 8, or 10 convenient districts, each district sending a proper number of delegates to Congress, so that each colony sends at least 30. The total membership of Congress would then be at least 390. Each Congress would sit and choose a president by the following method. When the delegates have assembled, one colony is drawn by lot from all 13, after which Congress chooses, by ballot, a president from among the delegates of that colony. In the next Congress, one colony is drawn by lot from the remaining 12, omitting the colony that supplied the president last time, and so on, until all 13 have had their proper rotation. To ensure that nothing becomes law unless it is satisfactorily just, no fewer than 3/5 of Congress should constitute a majority. Anyone who would stir up discord under a government so equitably formed as this would have joined Lucifer in his revolt. But since there is a real delicacy about from whom and in what manner this business should first arise, and since it seemed most fitting and consistent that it come from some intermediate body standing between the governed and the governors, that is, between Congress and the people, let a continental conference be held in the following manner and for the following purpose. A committee of 26 members of Congress, 2 for each colony, 2 members from each House of Assembly or Provincial Convention, and 5 representatives of the people at large, to be chosen in the capital city or town of each province, on behalf of the whole province, by as many qualified voters as shall think proper to attend from all parts of the province. Or, if more convenient, the representatives may be chosen in 2 or 3 of the most populous parts of it. In this conference so assembled, the 2 great principles of effective action, knowledge and power, will be united. The members of Congress, assemblies and conventions, having had experience in national affairs, will serve as able and useful counselors, and the whole body, being authorized by the people, will carry a truly legal authority. When the conferring members have met, let their business be to frame a continental charter, or Charter of the United Colonies, answering to what is called the Magna Carta of England. It should fix the number and manner of choosing members of Congress and members of Assembly, together with their terms of sitting, and draw the line of business and jurisdiction between them, always remembering that our strength is continental, not provincial. It should secure freedom and property to all men, and above all things, the free exercise of religion, according to the dictates of conscience, together with such other matters as a charter must contain. Immediately after completing this work, the said conference should dissolve, and the bodies chosen in conformity with the said charter should become the legislators and governors of this continent for the time being. May God preserve their peace and happiness. Amen. Should any body of men hereafter be appointed for this or a similar purpose, I offer them the following passage from that wise observer of governments, Dragonetti. The science, he says, of the politician consists in fixing the true point of happiness and freedom. Those men would deserve the gratitude of ages who should discover a mode of government that contained the greatest sum of individual happiness with the least national expense, Dragonetti, on virtues and reward. But where, say some, is the King of America? I will tell you, friend, he reigns above, and does not lay waste to mankind, like the royal brute of Great Britain, yet, so that we may not appear deficient even in earthly honors, let a day be solemnly set apart for proclaiming the charter. Let it be brought forth and placed on the divine law, the word of God. Let a crown be placed upon it, by which the world may know that, insofar as we approve of monarchy, in America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. But lest any ill use be made of it afterward, let the crown, at the conclusion of the ceremony, be demolished and scattered among the people whose right it is. A government of our own is our natural right. When a person seriously reflects on how precarious human affairs are, he will become convinced that it is infinitely wiser and safer to frame a constitution of our own in a calm and deliberate manner, while we have the power to do so, than to leave so momentous an event to time and chance. If we omit it now, some future Masaniello may arise who, seizing on popular discontents, gathers the desperate and the discontented around him, and, by assuming the powers of government, sweeps away the liberties of the continent like a flood. Should the government of America return to the hands of Britain, the unstable state of things would tempt some desperate adventurer to try his fortune, and in such a case, what help could Britain give? Before she could hear the news, the fatal business might be done, leaving us suffering like the wretched Britons under the oppression of the conqueror. You who oppose independence, now do not know what you are doing. You are opening a door to eternal tyranny by leaving the seat of government vacant. There are thousands and tens of thousands who would think it glorious to expel from this continent that barbarous and hellish power that has stirred up the Indians and Negroes to destroy us. The cruelty carries a double guilt. It deals brutally with us and treacherously with them. To speak of friendship with those whom our reason forbids us to trust, and whom our affections, wounded in 1,000 places, instruct us to detest, is madness and folly. Every day wears away the little that remains of kinship between us and them. Can there be any reason to hope that as the relationship dissolves, the affection will grow, or that we shall agree better when we have 10 times more and greater causes of quarrel than ever. You who speak of harmony and reconciliation, can you restore to us the time that is past? Can you give prostitution back its former innocence? No more can you reconcile Britain and America. The last cord is now broken. The people of England are presenting addresses against us. There are injuries that nature cannot forgive. She would cease to be nature if she could. The continent might as well forgive the murders of Britain as the lover forgive the ravisher of his mistress. The Almighty has planted in us these inextinguishable feelings for good and wise purposes. They are the guardians of His image in our hearts. They distinguish us from the herd of common animals. The social compact would dissolve, and justice would be driven from the earth, or exist only by accident, if we were unmoved by the bonds of affection. The robber and the murderer would often escape unpunished if the injuries our nature sustains did not provoke us into demanding justice. O you who love mankind, you who dare oppose not only the tyranny but the tyrant, stand forth. Every corner of the old world is overrun with oppression. Freedom has been hunted round the globe. Asia and Africa have long expelled her. Europe regards her as a stranger, and England has given her warning to depart. Receive the fugitive and prepare in time an asylum for mankind. Chapter 3. America's Present Ability. With miscellaneous reflections, I have never met a man, either in England or America, who has not admitted his belief that a separation between the two countries would come sooner or later. And there is no subject on which we have shown less judgment than in trying to define what we call the ripeness or fitness of the continent for independence. Since all men accept that the separation must happen and differ only about when, let us take a broad survey of things and try to settle the question of timing. But I need not look far. The inquiry ends at once, for the time has found us. The general agreement and glorious union of all circumstances proves it. It is not in numbers but in unity that our great strength lies, yet our present numbers are already sufficient to repel the force of all the world. The continent at this moment has the largest body of armed and disciplined men of any power under heaven, and has arrived at exactly that point of strength where no single colony could stand alone, yet all together can accomplish anything. Our land force is more than adequate. As for naval affairs, we cannot pretend to forget that Britain would never have permitted an American man of war to be built while the continent remained in her hands. We would therefore be no further advanced in that branch 100 years from now than we are today. Indeed, we would be less advanced, because the timber of this country diminishes every day, and what remains in the end will be far off or hard to obtain. If the continent were crowded with inhabitants, our sufferings under present circumstances would be unbearable. The more seaport towns we had, the more we would have both to defend and to lose. Our present numbers are so well matched to our needs that no man need be idle. The decline of trade supplies an army, and the necessities of an army create new trade. We have no debt, and whatever we may take on for this cause will stand as a glorious memorial to our virtue. If we can but leave posterity a settled form of government and an independent constitution of its own, the purchase is cheap at any price. But to spend millions merely to get a few vile acts repealed and drive out the present ministry is unworthy of the cost, and it treats posterity with the utmost cruelty. It leaves them the great work still to do, and a debt on their backs from which they gain nothing. Such a thought is unworthy of any man of honor. It is the true mark of a narrow heart and a small-minded politician. The debt we may incur deserves no alarm if the work is but accomplished. No nation should be without a debt. A national debt is a national bond, and when it bears no interest, it is no burden at all. Britain is weighed down by a debt of upward of £140 million sterling, on which she pays upward of £4 million in interest. As compensation for that debt, she has a large navy. America has neither debt nor navy, yet for 1/20 of the English national debt she could have a navy twice as large. The Navy of England is not worth, at this time, more than £3.5 million sterling. The first and second editions of this pamphlet were published without the following calculations, which are now given as proof that the above estimate of the Navy is a sound one. See Appendices, Naval History, Intro. Page 56. The cost of building a ship of each rate and furnishing her with masts, yards, sails, and rigging, together with 8 months of boatswains' and carpenters' sea stores, as calculated by Mr. Burchett, Secretary to the Navy, is shown in Paine's calculation below. Paine's calculation lists the cost of ships by gun count and applies those figures to the British Navy of 1757. His total estimate for the Navy is £3.5 million sterling. No country on the globe is as well placed, or as naturally capable of raising a fleet, as America. Tar, timber, iron, and cordage are her native products. We need to go abroad for nothing. The Dutch, by contrast, who make large profits by hiring out their warships to the Spanish and Portuguese, must import most of the materials they use. We ought to regard shipbuilding as an article of commerce. It is the natural industry of this country. It is the best money we can spend. A navy, when complete, is worth more than it cost, and it is that precise point of national policy where commerce and protection meet. Let us build. If we do not need the ships, we can sell them, and by that means replace our paper currency with ready gold and silver. On the matter of manning a fleet, people commonly fall into a serious error. It is not necessary that even 1/4 of the crew be sailors. The privateer Terrible, under Captain Death, fought the fiercest enfouement of the last war, yet had fewer than 20 sailors on board, though her complement was upward of 200 men. A few skilled and sociable sailors will quickly teach a sufficient number of active landsmen the common work of a ship. We can never be better positioned to begin building a naval force than now, while our timber is still standing, our fisheries are blockaded, and our sailors and shipwrights are out of work. Men of war of 70 and 80 guns were built 40 years ago in New England. Why not the same now? Shipbuilding is America's greatest pride, and in it she will in time surpass the whole world. The great empires of the East are largely inland, and therefore shut out from any possibility of rivaling her. Africa remains undeveloped. No power in Europe has either such an extent of coastline or such an internal supply of materials. Where nature has given one, she has withheld the other. To America alone has she been generous with both. The vast empire of Russia is nearly landlocked, so her boundless forests, tar, iron, and cordage are only articles of commerce, not the foundation of naval power. In terms of safety, can we afford to be without a fleet? We are no longer the small people we were 60 years ago. At that time we might have left our property in the streets, or the fields rather, and slept soundly, with no locks or bolts on our doors and windows. That is no longer the case, and our means of defense must grow with our property. A common pirate 12 months ago might have sailed up the Delaware and demanded from the city of Philadelphia whatever sum he pleased. The same could have happened to other places. Any bold fellow in a brig of 14 or 16 guns might have plundered the whole continent and carried off $500,000 in money. These are circumstances that demand our attention and point plainly to the necessity of naval protection. Some will perhaps say that once we have made our peace with Britain, she will protect us. Can they be so foolish as to mean that she will station a navy in our harbors for that purpose? Common sense tells us that the power which has tried to subdue us is the last power fit to defend us. Conquest can be carried out under the pretense of friendship, and we ourselves, after long and brave resistance, might at last be cheated into slavery. And if her ships are not to be admitted into our harbors, I would ask how she is going to protect us. A navy 3,000 or 4,000 miles away is of little use, and in sudden emergencies of none at all. If we must ultimately protect ourselves, why not do it for ourselves? Why do it for another? In the long English list of warships, not a 10th part are fit for service at any given time. Many of them no longer exist at all, yet their names remain on the list, if so much as a plank survives. nor could a fifth part of those that are serviceable be spared for any single station. Britain's claims over the East and West Indies, the Mediterranean, Africa, and other parts of the world place heavy demands on her navy. From a mixture of prejudice and inattention, we have formed a false picture of England's naval power, talking as if we would have to face the whole of it at once, and concluding from that we must build one equally large. This claim, which cannot be instantly met, has been used by a set of disguised Tories to discourage us from beginning at all. Nothing could be further from the truth. If America had only a 20th part of Britain's naval force, she would still be more than a match, because we claim no foreign dominions. Our entire force would operate on our own coast, where over time we would enjoy a 2-to-1 advantage over an enemy that must sail 3,000 or 4,000 miles before attacking us, then sail the same distance walk to refit and resupply. And although Britain's fleet checks our trade to Europe, we hold an equally strong check over her trade to the West Indies, which, lying close to the continent, lies entirely at our mercy. Some method could be devised for maintaining a naval force in peacetime, should we judge a permanent navy necessary. If premiums were offered to merchants to build and operate ships mounting 20, 30, 40, or 50 guns, with the premiums proportioned to the loss of cargo space, 50 or 60 such ships, together with a few guard ships on constant duty, would sustain a sufficient navy. This would spare us the evil so loudly complained of in England, where their fleet rots in the docks during peace. Uniting the resources of commerce and defense is sound policy. When our strength and our wealth support each other, we need fear no foreign enemy. In almost every article of defense we abound. Hemp grows so vigorously here that we need never lack rope. Our iron is superior to that of other countries. Our small arms equal any in the world. We can cast cannon at will. We are producing saltpeter and gunpowder every day. Our knowledge is improving hourly. Resolution is our native character, and courage has never yet forsaken us. What, then, do we lack? Why do we hesitate? From Britain, we can expect nothing but ruin. If she is once admitted to the government of America again, this continent will not be worth living in. Jealousies will always be rising, insurrections will be constantly breaking out, and who will go forth to quell them? Who will risk his life to force his own countrymen into submission to a foreign power? The dispute between Pennsylvania and Connecticut over certain unlocated lands shows the utter inadequacy of British government, and fully proves that nothing but continental authority can settle continental matters. Another reason why the present time is preferable to all others is that the fewer our numbers are, the more land remains unoccupied. That land, instead of being lavished by the king on his worthless favorites, can be applied not only to paying the present debt, but to the permanent support of government. No nation on earth holds such an advantage. The early state of the colonies, far from arguing against independence, is an argument in its favor. We are sufficiently numerous, and if we were more so, we might be less united. It is worth noting that the more densely populated a country is, the smaller its armies tend to be. In military numbers, the ancients far exceeded the moderns, and the reason is plain. Trade follows population, and men become too absorbed in commerce to attend to anything else. Commerce diminishes the spirit of both patriotism and military defense. History makes clear that the bravest achievements were always accomplished in the youth of a nation. With the growth of commerce, England has lost its spirit. The city of London, for all its size, endures repeated insults with the patience of a coward. The more men have to lose, the less willing they are to risk it. The rich are generally slaves to fear and submit to courtly power with the trembling duplicity of a spaniel. Youth is the seed time of good habits, in nations as in individuals. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to form the continent into one government half a century from now. The wide variety of interests produced by an increase of trade and population would create confusion. colony would be set against colony. Each, being capable on its own, would scorn the assistance of the others. While the proud and foolish gloried in their petty distinctions, the wise would lament that the union had not been formed sooner. The present time is therefore the right time to establish it. The bonds formed in infancy and the friendships forged in shared misfortune are the most lasting and unbreakable of all. Our present union bears both these marks. We are young, and we have suffered together, but our concord has survived our troubles and sets a memorable moment for posterity to honor. The present time is also that singular moment which comes to a nation only once, the moment of forming itself into a government. Most nations have allowed that moment to slip and have been compelled to receive laws from their conquerors rather than make laws for themselves. They had a king first and a form of government afterward, whereas a charter of government ought to be formed first, with men appointed afterward to carry it out. From the errors of other nations, let us learn wisdom and seize the present opportunity to begin government at the right end. When William the Conqueror subdued England, he gave them law at the point of the sword. Until we ensure that the seat of government in America is legally and authoritatively established, we are in danger of having it seized by some fortunate ruffian who may treat us in the same manner. And then where will our freedom be? Where our property? On the subject of religion, I hold it to be the indispensable duty of government to protect all conscientious practitioners of their faith, and I know of no other business government has with religion. Let a man cast aside the narrowness of soul and selfishness of principle that the petty-minded of every creed are so unwilling to surrender, and his fears on this head will immediately dissolve. Suspicion is the companion of small souls and the ruin of all good society. For my own part, I fully and conscientiously believe it is the will of the Almighty that there should be a diversity of religious opinions among us. That diversity offers a wider field for our Christian kindness. Were we all of one way of thinking, our religious dispositions would have nothing to exercise themselves upon. On this generous principle, I regard the various denominations among us as children of the same family, differing only in what are called their Christian names. Earlier in this work, I offered a few thoughts on the propriety of a continental charter, presenting them as hints rather than plans. I take the liberty of returning to that subject here, observing that a charter is to be understood as a bond of solemn obligation, by which the whole commits itself to upholding the rights of every separate part, whether in religion, professional freedom, or property. A firm bargain and a clear account make lasting friends. I have also previously noted the necessity of a large and equal representation, and no political question more deserves our attention. A small number of electors, or a small number of representatives, is equally dangerous. If the number of representatives is not only small, but unequal, the danger is greater still. Consider this example. When the petition of the associators came before the House of Assembly of Pennsylvania, only 28 members were present. All 8 members from Bucks County voted against it, and had 7 of the Chester County members done the same, the entire province would have been governed effectively by 2 counties alone. This is a danger to which it is always exposed. The unwarranted stretch that House made in its last session to gain undue authority over the delegates of that province should warn the people at large how carefully they should guard the power they place in others' hands. A set of instructions for their delegates was drawn up that for sense and substance would have shamed a schoolboy. Approved by a few people, a very few, outside the chamber, those instructions were carried into the House and passed as representing the whole colony. Yet had the whole colony known how reluctantly that House had taken up certain necessary public measures, they would not have hesitated for a moment to judge it unworthy of such a trust. Immediate necessity makes many things convenient that would become oppressive if continued. Expediency and right are different things. When the calamities of America required a consultation, there was no readier or more proper method than to appoint persons from the several houses of assembly for that purpose, and the wisdom with which they proceeded saved this continent from ruin. But since it is more than probable that we shall never be without a Congress, every well-wisher to good order must acknowledge that the mode for choosing its members deserves careful consideration, and I put it as a question to those who make a study of mankind. Is not representation and election too great a power for one and the same body of men to possess? When we are planning for posterity, we ought to remember that civic virtue is not hereditary. It is from our enemies that we often gain excellent maxims and are frequently surprised into reason by their mistakes. Mr. Cornwall, one of the Lords of the Treasury, treated the petition of the New York Assembly with contempt because that House, he said, consisted of only 26 members, a number too trifling, he argued, to speak with decency for the whole. We thank him for his involuntary honesty. To conclude, however strange it may appear to some, or however unwilling they may be to think it, the fact remains that many strong and striking reasons can be given to show that nothing can settle our affairs so swiftly as an open and determined declaration for independence. Some of these reasons are as follows. First, it is the custom of nations, when any two are at war, for other powers not engaged in the quarrel to step in as mediators and bring about the preliminaries of a peace. But while America calls herself a subject of Great Britain, no power, however well disposed, can offer her mediation, so in our present state we may quarrel on forever. Secondly, it is unreasonable to suppose that France or Spain will give us any kind of assistance if we mean only to use that assistance to repair the breach and strengthen the connection between Britain and America, because those powers would be harmed by the consequences. Thirdly, while we profess ourselves subjects of Britain, we must in the eyes of foreign nations be considered rebels. It is somewhat dangerous to their peace as a precedent for men to be in arms under the name of subjects. We, on the ground, can resolve the paradox, but to unite resistance with subjection requires an idea far too refined for common understanding. Fourthly, were a manifesto to be published and dispatched to foreign courts, setting forth the miseries we have endured and the peaceful methods we have used ineffectually for redress, and declaring at the same time that, no longer able to live happily or safely under the cruel disposition of the British court, we had been driven to the necessity of breaking off all connections with her, while assuring all such courts of our peaceable disposition toward them, and our desire to enter into trade with them, such a memorial would do more good for this continent than a ship loaded with petitions to Britain. Under our present designation as British subjects, we can be neither received nor heard abroad. The custom of all courts is against us, and will remain so until by independence we take our rank among other nations. These proceedings may at first seem strange and difficult, but like all the other steps we have already taken, they will in a little time become familiar and agreeable. Until independence is declared, the continent will feel like a man who keeps putting off some unpleasant business from day to day, yet knows it must be done, hates to begin it, wishes it were over, and is continually haunted by the thought that it cannot be avoided. Chapter 4. Appendix to Common Sense. Since the publication of the first edition of this pamphlet, or rather on the very same day it came out, the King's Speech made its appearance in this city, Philadelphia. Had the spirit of prophecy directed the birth of this production, it could not have brought it forth at a more timely or necessary moment. The bloody-mindedness of the one shows the necessity of pursuing the doctrine of the other. Men wrath by way of revenge, and the speech, instead of terrifying anyone, prepared the way for the manly principles of independence. Ceremony, and even silence, from whatever motives they may arise, have a harmful tendency when they give the slightest encouragement to base and wicked performances. If this maxim is granted, it naturally follows that the King's Speech, being a piece of finished villainy, deserved and still deserves a general condemnation from both the Congress and the people. Yet the domestic peace of a nation depends greatly on what might properly be called national manners, and it is often better to pass some things over in silent disdain than to adopt methods of protest that might introduce the slightest disturbance to that guardian of our peace and safety. Perhaps it is chiefly owing to this prudent restraint that the king's speech has not before now suffered a public rebuke. The speech, if it may be called one, is nothing better than a willful and audacious libel against truth, the common good, and the existence of mankind. It is a formal and pompous method of offering up human sacrifices to the pride of tyrants. But this general massacre of mankind is one of the privileges and certain consequences of kings, for as nature does not recognize them, they do not recognize nature. And although they are beings of our own creating, they do not recognize us, and have become the gods of their creators. The speech has one good quality. It is not calculated to deceive, nor could we be deceived by it, even if we tried. Brutality and tyranny appear plainly on its face. It leaves us in no doubt, and every line makes clear, even as you read it, that he who hunts the woods for prey, the naked and untutored Indian, is less savage than the King of Britain. Sir John Dalrymple, the supposed author of a whining Jesuitical piece falsely called The Address of the People of England to the Inhabitants of America, has perhaps assumed, very unwisely on his part, that the people here could be frightened by the pomp and description of a king, and so has revealed the real character of the present one. But, says this writer, if you are inclined to pay compliments to an administration which we do not complain of, meaning the Marquis of Rockingham's at the repeal of the Stamp Act, it is very unfair in you to withhold them from that prince, by whose nod alone they were permitted to do anything. This is Toryism with a vengeance. Here is idolatry without even a mask. The man who can calmly hear and swallow such doctrine has forfeited his claim to rationality. He is an apostate from the order of manhood, one who has not only surrendered the proper dignity of man, but sunk himself beneath the rank of animals, and contemptibly crawls through the world like a worm. However, it matters very little now what the King of England either says or does. He has wickedly broken through every moral and human obligation, trampled nature and conscience beneath his feet, and by a steady and constitutional spirit of insolence and cruelty brought upon himself a universal hatred. It is now in the interest of America to provide for herself. She already has a large and young family, whom it is more her duty to care for than to go on granting away her property to support a power that has become a disgrace to the names of men and Christians. You, whose office it is to watch the morals of a nation, of whatever sect or denomination you belong to, as well as you who are more immediately the guardians of the public liberty. If you wish to preserve your native country free from European corruption, you must in your hearts wish for a separation. But leaving the moral part to private reflection, I will confine my further remarks chiefly to the following heads. First, that it is in the interest of America to be separated from Britain. Secondly, which is the easier and more practicable plan, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. In support of the first, I could, if I judged it proper, produce the opinions of some of the ablest and most experienced men on this continent, whose sentiments on the matter are not yet publicly known. It is in reality a self-evident position, for no nation in a state of foreign dependence, limited in its commerce and restricted in its legislative powers, can ever reach any real eminence. America does not yet know what genuine prosperity is, although the progress she has made stands unparalleled in the history of other nations. It is but childhood, compared with what she would be capable of achieving if she had, as she ought to have, the legislative powers in her own hands. England is at this time proudly coveting what would do her no good, even if she accomplished it, while the continent hesitates on a matter that will be its final ruin if neglected. It is the commerce, not the conquest, of America from which England would benefit, and that commerce would in large measure continue even if the two countries were as independent of each other as France and Spain. because in many articles neither can find a better market. But it is the independence of this country from Britain or any other power that is now the main and only object worthy of contention, and which, like all other truths discovered by necessity, will appear clearer and stronger every day. First, because it will come to that sooner or later. Secondly, because the longer it is delayed, the harder it will be to accomplish. I have often amused myself, both in public and private company, by silently noting the specious errors of those who speak without reflecting. Among the many I have heard, the following seems the most common, that had this rupture happened 40 or 50 years hence, instead of now, the continent would have been more able to shake off dependence. To this I reply that our military ability at this time arises from the experience gained in the last war, and in 40 or 50 years that experience would be entirely gone. The continent would not by that time have a general or even a military officer remaining, and we, or those who succeed us, would be as ignorant of military affairs as the ancient Indians. This single point, closely considered, will prove beyond any answer that the present time is preferable to all others. The argument runs as follows. At the close of the last war, we had experience but lacked numbers. In 40 or 50 years, we will have numbers but lack experience. The proper moment must therefore be some particular point between the two extremes, at which enough of the former remains, and a sufficient increase of the latter has been obtained. That point of time is the present time. The reader will pardon this digression, as it does not properly belong under the head with which I began, and to which I return with the following position. Should affairs be patched up with Britain, and she remain the governing and sovereign power of America, which, as matters now stand, is surrendering the point entirely, we shall deprive ourselves of the very means of paying the debt we have, or may contract. The value of the backlands, which some of the provinces are clandestinely deprived of by the unjust extension of the limits of Canada, valued only at £5 sterling per 100 acres, amounts to upward of 25 millions, Pennsylvania currency, and the quit rents at 1 penny sterling per acre to 2 millions yearly. It is by the sale of those lands that the debt may be paid without burdening anyone, and the quit rent reserved on them will always reduce, and in time will wholly support, the yearly expense of government. It does not matter how long the debt takes to pay, provided that the lands, when sold, are applied to its discharge, with the Congress for the time being acting as the continental trustees for that purpose. I proceed now to the second head, which is the easier and more practicable plan, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. Anyone guided by nature is not easily dislodged from his argument, and on that ground I answered generally. Independence is a single simple line contained within ourselves, while reconciliation is exceedingly complicated, requiring a treacherous and unpredictable court to interfere. The answer is plain. The present state of America is truly alarming to every person capable of reflection. We have no law, no government, no power, except what courtesy grants and permits. We are held together by an unprecedented unity of feeling that is nonetheless subject to change, and that every secret enemy is working to dissolve. Our present condition is legislation without law, wisdom without a plan, a constitution without a name, and, most strangely of all, perfect independence contending for dependence. The situation is without precedent. This case has never existed before, and no one can say how it will end. No man's property is secure in this slack and unbraced state of affairs. The minds of ordinary people are left to wander at random, and seeing no fixed object before them, they pursue whatever fancy or opinion presents. Nothing is treated as criminal. There is no such thing as treason, and so every person thinks himself free to act as he pleases. The Tories would not have dared to assemble offensively had they known that their lives, by that act, were forfeited to the laws of the state. A clear line should be drawn between English soldiers taken in battle and inhabitants of America taken in arms. The first are prisoners, the latter are traitors. The one forfeits his liberty, the other his head. For all our wisdom, there is a visible feebleness in some of our proceedings that gives encouragement to dissension. The continental belt is buckled too loosely. If something is not done in time, it will be too late to do anything, and we shall fall into a condition in which neither reconciliation nor independence is practicable. The king and his worthless followers have returned to their old game of dividing the continent, and there are printers among us not unwilling to spread plausible falsehoods. The artful and hypocritical letter that appeared a few months ago in 2 of the New York papers, and likewise in 2 others, is evidence that there are men who lack both judgment and honesty. It is easy to slip into corners and talk of reconciliation, but do such men seriously consider how difficult the task is and how dangerous it may become if the continent divides over it? Do they take into account the various classes of men whose situations and circumstances, as well as their own, must be considered? Do they put themselves in the place of the sufferer, whose all is already gone, and of the soldier who has quitted all for the defense of his country? If their ill-judged moderation suits only their own private situations, regardless of others, events will show them that they are reckoning without their host. Some say, "Restore us to the footing we were on in 1763. To that I answer, the request is not now in Britain's power to comply with, nor will she propose it. But even if she could, and even if it were granted, I ask a reasonable question. By what means is a corrupt and faithless court to be held to its engagements? Another parliament, or even the present one, might later repeal the obligation on the pretext that it was violently obtained or unwisely granted. In that case, where is our redress? Nations cannot go to court against each other. Cannon are the lawyers of crowns, and the sword, not of justice but of war, decides the suit. Moreover, to stand on the footing of 1763, it is not enough that the laws be returned to their former state. Our circumstances must be returned as well. Our burnt and destroyed towns must be repaired or rebuilt, our private losses made good, and our public debts, contracted for defense, discharged. Otherwise we shall be millions worse off than we were in that period we now look back on with longing. Such a request, had it been granted a year ago, would have won the heart and soul of the continent. Now it is too late. The Rubicon is passed. Besides, taking up arms merely to force the repeal of a revenue law seems as unjustifiable by divine law, and as repugnant to human feeling, as taking up arms to compel obedience to it. The object on either side does not justify the means, for the lives of men are too valuable to be thrown away on such trifles. What does justify the use of arms is the violence done and threatened to our persons, the destruction of our property by an armed force, and the invasion of our country by fire and sword. The moment such defense became necessary, all subjection to Britain should have ceased, and the independence of America should have been considered as dating its beginning from, and proclaimed by, the first musket fired against her. This line is a line of consistency, drawn neither by caprice nor extended by ambition, but produced by a chain of events of which the colonies were not the authors. I will close these remarks with the following timely and well-intended thoughts. We ought to reflect that there are 3 different ways by which independence may eventually come about, and that one of those 3 will, sooner or later, be the fate of America. By the lawful voice of the people in Congress, by military power, or by a mob. It may not always happen that our soldiers are citizens, and the multitude a body of reasonable men. Virtue, as I have already noted, is not hereditary, nor is it perpetual. Should independence come about by the first of those means, we have every opportunity and every encouragement to form the noblest, purest constitution the face of the earth has ever seen. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation like the present has not arisen since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand, and a people, perhaps as numerous as all of Europe, are to receive their portion of freedom from the events of a few months. The reflection is awe-inspiring, and in this light, how trivial and ridiculous do the petty cavillings of a few weak or self-interested men appear when weighed against the affairs of a world. Should we neglect this favorable and inviting period, and independence later be achieved by any other means, we must lay the consequence to ourselves, or rather, to those whose narrow and prejudiced minds habitually oppose the measure without ever inquiring or reflecting. There are reasons in support of independence that men would do better to think over privately than to be told publicly. We ought not now to be debating whether to be independent, but rather to be anxious to accomplish it on a firm, secure, and honorable basis, and uneasy that it has not yet begun. Every day confirms its necessity. Even the Tories, if any such remain among us, should of all men be the most eager to promote it. Just as the appointment of committees at first protected them from popular rage, a wise and well-established form of government will be the only certain means of continuing that protection. So if they have not virtue enough to be Whigs, they ought to have prudence enough to wish for independence. In short, independence is the only bond that ties and keeps us together. We shall then see our object clearly, and our ears will be lawfully closed to the schemes of an intriguing and cruel enemy. We shall then also be on a proper footing to treat with Britain, for there is reason to believe that the pride of that court will be less wounded by treating with the American states for terms of peace than with those it calls rebellious subjects for terms of accommodation. Our delay is what encourages Britain to hope for conquest, and our hesitation serves only to prolong the war. We have already withheld our trade to obtain toll in a redress of our grievances without any good effect. Let us now try the alternative, independently redressing those grievances ourselves and then offering to reopen trade. The mercantile and reasonable part of England will still be with us, because peace with trade is preferable to war without it. And if this offer is not accepted, other courts may be applied to. On these grounds I rest the matter, since no attempt has yet been made to refute the doctrine contained in the earlier editions of this pamphlet. That silence is itself a proof that either the doctrine cannot be refuted, or that those who favor it are too numerous to be opposed. Therefore, instead of eyeing one another with suspicious or doubtful curiosity, let each of us hold out to his neighbor the hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing a line that, like an act of amnesty, shall bury every former dissension in forgetfulness. Let the names of Whig and Tory be extinct, and let no other names be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind and of the free and independent states of America. You've been listening to Common Sense by Thomas Paine in a modern, updated edition from Updated Works. If you would like to read or listen to other updated works, visit updatedworks.com.